And welcome to the very first beginner jazz tutorial series here on the Jazzmentl channel. My name is Tobey. Thank you for joining me. We've had many requests to deal with jazz from the very beginning, so that's exactly where we're going to start. Yes, we have plenty of advanced tutorials, but this will be the first in our tutorial series on how to play jazz as a beginner. We're going to start at the very beginning, and just like the song from The Sound of Music, that's what we're going to be focused on. We're going to start at the very beginning with the song Doe A Deer, a female deer. Now you're saying to yourself, wow, that sounds really rudimentary. Well, let me give you an example of where you would like to get, or where you should be by the end of this tutorial series. So most people would approach the song like a classical piano player, just like this. Well, yes, I mean, that sounds pretty average and classical in nature. So let's talk about where you would be by the end of this tutorial series. Where we're hoping to get is to be able to play that same song like this. I think you can probably hear the difference between those two things. And that's where we're going to go with this tutorial series. Now, the main thing to understand here is it's not just about playing notes. Sure, I could throw up a piece of sheet music and you could learn that version, or we could go through from the very beginning and learn how it's actually put together. Where did those chords come from? And that's really what jazz is all about. So you can take any song and reharmonize it like that, putting in more rich chords and dominant seventh and flat five chords and all kinds of little things in there that make it sound more like jazz. And that's what we're going to do, starting with the whole concept of seventh chords. So what I've done is written out some chords here on the page. Now, this is all going to be, at least for a little while, in the key of C. Now, most of you, if you're at a certain level, and you would probably have to be able to read music and to play a few scales and, you know, have a certain amount of dexterity in your fingers to be able to play like that. But if you can't do any of that, then it might even be a little bit advanced. This is not really for super beginners at the piano. This is for people like maybe grade 6, grade 7 or 8 conservatory piano, and being able to read music. If you've got those things together, then this is probably a good course for you, because at least you'll understand the harmony. Now, it's very different than traditional harmony. If you've ever taken Royal Conservatory classical harmony, this is a very different approach. So what we're going to do is just take a look at the C major scale. So what you have is whole tones and half tones. So you got 3 whole tones, then a half tone, then 3 whole tones, then a half tone. Now, when you build on harmony, even in classical harmony, you're working with what's called tertian harmony, which means chords that are built in thirds. So take a look at the piece of sheet music and you've got thirds from the scale. So you've got this third, then this third. And then all we're doing is following up with the scale in the key of C, all the thirds on each of the chords. These are all called triads. Let me just write that down. Triads. The reason why they're called triads is because there's 3 notes in each triad. Okay, now they're called something and each one has a symbol associated with it. So the first one is, it's a C major chord. Now you don't write any symbol to associate that, it's just C. And what does that mean? It means the first interval is a major third. Right? It says with chordy, major third. And then you have a minor third. So C doesn't denote a major third and a minor third, although you could look at it that way. What it is the intervals between the root and each of the notes. So the interval between the root and the first note is a third, the interval between the root and the next note is a fifth. What's called a perfect fifth. Most of these chords have perfect fifths. That one does, that one does, that one does. All except this one, which is a tritone. And we're going to talk about that considerably throughout this course. What does a tritone mean? What's its value? What's its worth? What do you use it for? And then back to a perfect fifth. So a C chord means a major third and a perfect fifth. Okay, then we go to D and we have to write a symbol here, minor. You're going to be seeing these symbols a lot. Now, the minor symbol, and some people write it like this, just FYI. They write M-I-N, or they write a small m, or there's a whole bunch of other things. But we're going to just use the minor symbol throughout this course. So it's D minor, which means the first interval is not a major, it's a minor, and then a perfect fifth. Put them together, you've got a D minor triad. That. Next chord, E minor triad, same thing. And you'll note that all of these chords come from the key of C and the scale of C. Next chord, we're back to a major chord because it's a major third and a perfect fifth. So that's an F chord, then a G chord, which is a major third and a perfect fifth, then a minor chord, and then this one is interesting. We'll come back to it in a second, and then it goes back to the C major. Okay, so what is this one? It starts out as a minor chord here, but instead of a perfect fifth, it has this tritone, which is a flatted fifth. Okay, so it could be flat 5, or what we call a tritone. So this is actually a B diminished chord. You'll note up here that they wrote it out, D-I-M. You see that sometimes. More often than not, you'll see a little circle beside it. So in the key of C, in this scale, we have a series of chords, most of which are major or minor, and then one chord that stands out, which is a B diminished chord. Okay, let's play them one more time. Now, if we use those chords to play Doe A Deer, a female deer, you would get this. Back to C, F, C. Okay, you kind of get the idea. Now, using triads is the major force behind all classical music. All classical music is based just on basic triads and sometimes seventh chords. So if we're playing Bach, all of that is based on triads. Listen. Right? Triads. And that's really kind of how classical music works. It's a series of triads and sometimes seventh chords in some kind of cadence. So for example, a G cadence is A minor, perfect cadence to D7, or D major to G, right? A, Sorry. Whereas jazz is things like this. Okay, so there's a big difference between the two, but where does that jazz stuff all come from? And the answer is you start to build on these triads with what we call seventh chords. So let me erase all of this and then scroll down the page a little bit here till we get to this. Now, you've got the same triad at the bottom of these chords. Got your C triad here, you got your D minor here, but there's an extra note on top. So where did that extra note come from? And the answer is right out of the scale. So in the first one, you're going up in thirds, and you've got a third on top. So Chordy says that's a C major seventh chord. So why is it written like that? You can write it actually like that, or you can write it like this, which is the way I like to write it. So like a little triangle and a seventh. The C major seventh chord is built up from a C major chord and a seventh from the scale. In this case, a major seventh. So you got to take a look at the outside interval, which is a major seventh. So C triad plus a major seventh. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Thinking we're making sense so far. This is a D minor seventh chord because it's made up of a D minor triad plus a seventh. Okay? Now, if that seventh were this note, because this is also a seventh, this is what's called a D minor major seventh, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Just take notes from the scale. Any alterations like D flat or C sharp outside of the scale is not, we're not working on that right now. So we've got D minor seventh, okay. Then E minor seventh, because it's made up of an E minor triad, like this, plus a seventh from the scale. Then you've got an F triad with this note on top. Now you'll notice that it is a major seventh. It's the same as the first chord because the outside interval is a major seventh. Then you've got this chord, which is G triad. And then the outside interval is a minor seventh. So when you put a major chord with a minor seventh, you get a dominant seventh chord, what's called G7. Interesting thing about that is just like this chord over here, it's going to contain this tritone. Right? That's the third of the chord, that's the seventh. This is probably the most important chord in all of jazz because that's what creates dissonance and resolve. Make sense? So we've got G7, then we've got A minor seventh because we've got an A minor chord with a minor seventh on top. Make sense? And then, interestingly enough, we do have a B diminished chord here with a seventh on top. This is a minor seventh. So when you fit all minor intervals, like this one, minor third, major third, you've got not a diminished seventh chord, you've got a B half diminished seventh chord because only half of the chord is diminished. This half of it is, this half of it isn't. This half of it is a minor chord. This half is diminished, this half is minor. We've called B half diminished seventh. Now some people call this minor 7 flat 5 and you can see that written here. I prefer this way, but you're going to see either in pieces of sheet music. You're going to see this half diminished seventh or this. These are interchangeable, just like this C major seventh is interchangeable with this. Obviously, this is a short form and this is kind of more European, but either you're going to see in sheet music. So you need both, right? It's not, I guess musicians prefer one over the other, but you need both. You need to be able to read both. And then finally, we're back to C major seventh chord. Now, in our next tutorial, what we're going to talk about is the progression, what we call 2 to 5 to 1, and then we're going to also introduce what we call cycle of fifths. Cycle of fifths is when you move from the fifth down to 1, down to 1, down to 1. So fifth to 1, which becomes 5, down to 1, and then becomes 5, and then down to 1. So things like this, where you've got a C major 7th chord to the 5th, and then you've got that note changing to dominant, to the 5th, to 1, to the dominant, to the 5th, to the 1, to the dominant. And we're going to talk about that in our next tutorial. But for now, what you need to know, and I've actually written it all out for you. If we scroll down here, I'm going to give you a link to download this as a guide, but you see I've written all the chords out in notation. So what I would suggest you do is just practice writing those symbols up here in the first 8 bars, but you can also refer to it in the last 8 bars where I've written it all out in notation and chord symbols for you. You can see C major 7, D minor 7, D minor 7. Now, that's really important. You can't get anywhere in jazz unless you understand that basic premise, that all chords are built not on triads, but they're built on 7th chords. All right, let me go over to the piano, the grand piano right now, and give you another example of where your head space should be at by the time you're done this tutorial series. I'm going to play the same song over on the grand piano, take a few more liberties, and hopefully you can get excited about that. And then I'll see you in the next tutorial. All right, so you'll probably notice that I played that in the key of G major versus C major. And the reason I did that is because by the time you finish this beginner tutorial course, that's something that should be very familiar to you, being able to transpose, because the way that chords work and the way they're put together is the same no matter what key you're in. And that's really the whole point of understanding what we're talking about in this series, which really makes it unlike any other tutorial series for beginners that you'll see on the internet, because I am a professional and getting you to the point where you're going to sound good as a jazz player is the most important thing. So I look forward to seeing you in the rest of the courses. Let me put a link to the sheet music up here in the corner that we talked about here today. And if you have any questions about that, you can write them in the comments below. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, just hit the little bell when you do and we'll notify you of all the upcoming videos that we're making. And if you'd like to give this video a thumbs up, it would really help the channel. Thanks again for doing that. If you're looking for the next video in this tutorial series, you'll find that right here.